President Cyril Ramaphosa emerged from his meeting with US President Donald Trump with a clear message that there was a firm agreement and undertaking that engagement would continue both bilaterally and within the G20. Meanwhile, in a different story, preparations are underway as UNISA, in partnership with the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, the Government of Tanzania and the Mwalimu Nyerere Foundation, will host the 15th annual Thabo Mbeki Africa Day lecture in Tanzania this coming Saturday. Now we're joined by SABC News International editor Sophie Mokoena, who's in Dar es Salaam for an update on these stories. Sophie, good morning. And let's start with what happened yesterday at the Oval Office. South Africa going there. Do you think the president and his delegation have been able to achieve its objective on that working visit to Washington?
I think, Sakina, when you look at what South Africa wanted from the U.S. in terms of the objectives that will lead to the aims, which is a long-term goal. They wanted to reset the relations, in other words, to reopen the channel to engage, because things have changed under this administration. We saw President Trump signing those executives that even led to the change in terms of trade relations with many countries around the world, not only South Africa, as it relates to tariffs. And we've seen already countries have engaged the U.S., but it was a bit difficult for South Africa to open that communication channel to address the issue of trade and the changes that the U.S. has implemented. And therefore, now that channel is open. The Ministers of Trade and Industry, including Minister of International Relations, will now directly engage their counterparts in the U.S. And there is now a framework in terms of the discussions on trade. Secondly, the intention was to ensure that the United States of America does participate in the programs of the G20, part of the build-up, technocrats, politicians, and up to the summit in November. Now, we are told President Trump has now made a commitment that they will participate while they will be arguing their position because they're not happy with the theme. And he has also indicated that he is intending to now attend the summit. Remember, a week ago, we were talking about the U.S. pulling out. They've achieved that. And lastly, on the issue of perception and the false and disinformation from some white Afrikaners and other groups in South Africa, like your AfriForum, your Solidarity, this issue of genocide or targeting or marginalization of the Afrikaners, they were able to tell President Trump in his face that it's not true, not via media. The first time they were able to emphasize that and saw the delegation making different inputs. I want to single out Johann Rupert because we know what's the sentiment around Johann Rupert. He was actually a star in terms of dismissing this misinformation, not even seeing reason in the Government of National Unity was upfront on the issue of genocide. Secondly, the president was able to dismiss that while the video might have caused drama of the EFF leader Julius Malema. Now you had Malema at the Oval Office while he was not there. It was expected that President Trump will not be able to convince him in public that there's no genocide, there's no targeting, it's just pure crime. Like Johann Rupert emphasized, even calling out the DA leader, saying, you know very well in your own province, the Western Cape, in Cape Flag, people are dying because of the gang. It's not only white people. All races are affected. We have a serious problem of crime. Now, I think on those three main issues, they knew that Trump were not going to be able to convince him, and they didn't want to have a back and forth because things were going to degenerate because he doesn't like to be lectured. But we are told behind the scenes he toned down to relent, to accept that the main issue here is crime. And therefore I can say in terms of those three objectives, but the issue is now the implementation going forward. And this is what South Africa will be watching, ordinary South African business, including us media. We want to know when are those meetings then.
Sophie, and of course, you know, that's a story that will unfold, the reaction to it throughout the day. But I want to turn our attention to another important matter where former President Thabo Mbeki, of course, his annual lecture will take place in Dar es Salaam. And it has been a week of activities so far. Talk to us about what is happening ahead of the lecture on Saturday.
Well, today the team will travel to Morogoro. Those will be participating tomorrow and Saturday during the lecture to reconnect with the rich history of Morogoro as it relates to where most of the activists were, including the Solomon Mahlangu Institute, SONASCO, where the children of those who were in exile were being educated. And therefore, the former South African president will be traveling with the entourage on a train to Morogoro, and he is just a better person to relate the story of Morogoro, because at some point in time he did stay in Tanzania. He was in and out of Tanzania after he was sent to Nigeria and later to Zambia, with OR coming here constantly, meeting those who were receiving military training in Tanzania, but also who were in exile. And they are doing this in partnership with Mwalimu Nyerere Foundation, the former president of Tanzania. And you would know that Nyerere was very close to people like President Thabo. And they are now reconnecting, much as the late Nyerere cannot participate, is no more, but the two foundations are now working together to ensure that they find a way to contribute towards building a better Africa with different topics ahead of the lecture.
And just the final one, Sophie, is it just going to be a visit to Morogoro? Is there any indication that that visit will also extend to Dakawa, which was another camp where some of the exiles also stayed in, or will it just be at Morogoro?
It will just be at Morogoro. Tomorrow there are activities and topical issues to discuss here in terms of building a better Africa ahead of that lecture on Saturday.
Thank you so much. SABC News International editor Sophie Mokoena, and she'll keep us up to speed with those developments in Tanzania, where the Thabo Mbeki annual lecture will take place in Dar es Salaam, and that is, of course, for Africa Day celebrations.